And I've canceled all meetings with the Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. And all I say to them is help is on its way.
All right, there you have it. Help is on the way. Couldn't be clearer. Walter Russell Mead, distinguished historian, Wall Street Journal columnist. Trump captivates the globe. That's his column that's running today. Walter, what do you think he means, help is on the way? How do you read it?
It's very hard to say. President Trump likes to make news, likes to make threats, doesn't like boots on the ground. It's going to be very interesting to see how the strength of these comments translates into action. Will Israel play a role? Very hard to say right now.
What role does, this is maybe an offshoot, but what role does Starlink and Elon Musk, you know, because the communications, the internet is down in Iran. They are maybe firing at will. It's very hard to know how many people are being killed, imprisoned, beheaded, and Lord knows what else. It just seems to me that's part of it. It's like old-fashioned human intelligence. We just have to, we're operating a little bit in the, in the dark, aren't we?
We are, and let's hope that Elon Musk is able to get Starlink active there so that the protesters can coordinate their actions and so that the rest of the world can find out what's happening in real time. To me, one of the extraordinary things is with maybe tens of thousands of people shot down in cold blood, where are the humanitarian demonstrations? Where are the human rights organizations? We're not actually hearing very much about this.
Optimally, this should come from within, but, in your respected ways, how do you handicap the odds that America may have to, have a second military pass at Iran?
I think it's unlikely. Although, in these revolutionary situations, you never really know. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But I think on balance, it's unlikely that the sheer protests will be enough to overthrow this regime. These people are tough. They've been murdering people since 1979 when they took power. They are committed. They're tightly knit. So it's going to be very hard for protesters on the street to overthrow this government unless some outside force in some way evens the odds.
Yes, presumably the United States. Presumably that's what help is on the way means, but I agree with you, it's hard to know precisely.
Right.
On the other side of the world, no help is on the way to Cuba, no oil money from Venezuela, no cash, no oil. I kind of love that story, Walter. I'm so damn sick of the Cubans and what they've done since the late 1950s. How do you see that play? Is this the end of the Havana regime? Is this the end of the Havana KGB in Venezuela? Also, it's like a twofer.
It would be wonderful. It would be wonderful. I think the one thing we can be sure of is that it's going to be difficult what happens in Cuba. But let's not forget that it's not just that Cuba is oppressing its own people. Something like 25% of the population of Cuba have essentially been driven into exile by poverty. That is to say, they are exporting refugees and immigrants that are a cost and destabilizing the neighborhood. So it's not just what Cuba has been doing, and the same in Venezuela. They're not just internal matters. They actually are of genuine, legitimate concern to the neighbors.
If I read your column right today, with respect to Venezuela and Iran and Cuba and so forth, you say the biggest loser is Vladimir Putin in Russia, and I found that a very interesting observation. Can you expand on it?
Sure. As you know, there are a lot of people who like to sort of amuse themselves with the idea that Donald Trump is somehow a Putin fanboy or a Putin puppet. But ask yourself, where has Putin made alliances and invested in alliances? Iran, Venezuela, Cuba. What does Putin depend on for money? Oil, a high oil price. What happens if Venezuelan oil comes back into the market? What happens if there's a regime change in Iran and their oil comes back into the market? Putin loses he loses prestige, he loses money, he loses power. This is not what a Putin puppet would do.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. Point. I agree. I don't think there's anybody that understands oil and oil diplomacy better than Donald Trump. I don't think there's anybody, at least not for a long time that I can remember. And this stuff's been around. Now, I hear Greenland is looking for a cultural attaché, a good historian, an Ivy League type historian, Walter Russell Mead. What happens now to Greenland? It looks like Mr. Trump is very focused on it. Of course, this came up in the first term. Many of us were prompting him on this, not that he needed prompting. I mean, how do you read the Greenland story? Because that, look at it. The Chinese are there, the Russians are there. I mean, it's, I think of it somehow as the top hat or the top of the hat of the whole Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, you look at where Greenland is geographically, and it is critical. It is absolutely in the American national interest in a time of rising global instability and conflict for us to make sure that Greenland is secure. Now, I'm not quite sure that we actually have to annex the whole thing to get what we want, but what I think we do need to have is a very clear idea for our own national security, for our own economic security. What kind of access? Is it submarine bases? Is it rare earths? Is it denial of access to Russian and Chinese influence? So let's hope that what happens out of all of this is that the U.S. succeeds in getting the conversation going that leads to a result that's okay for the people in Greenland, but meets the essential needs of the United States.
Walter, really, in your long and distinguished period of writings and observations, have you ever seen anything like this? All of a sudden,
I
bang,
never
bang.
have.
I know. It's really quite remarkable.
If Trump, if President Trump in the next few months ends up with regime change in Venezuela, the fall of the mullahs in Iran, the fall of Cuba, of the Cuban Communist Party, presidents going back to John F. Kennedy would have envied some of those victories. These are historic moments. Now the risks are high. Things can go wrong, but Trump is aiming for he's swinging for the fences. There's really no doubt about it.
He is. He thinks out of the box because he doesn't believe in any boxes. It's a phenomenal
He does
thing.
not believe in a box.
Walter Russell Mead, thank you ever so much. As always, sir, we appreciate your commentary.